Welcome to Random Flyer, the podcast that brings you the true stories of New Zealand's airline history. Today, we're talking about the National Airways Corporation, Vickers Viscount, an elegant turboprop airliner that redefined comfort and speed on New Zealand's trunk routes. Some crashed without injury, some were scrapped, and some remain resplendent in painstaking restoration. These are their stories. The Vickers Viscount was a British medium-range turboprop airliner. It was first flown in 1948. It was the world's first turboprop airliner to enter regular service and became the most successful post-war airliners of its era. It was a low-wing cantilever monoplane and could accommodate up to 75 passengers, although the New Zealand National Airways Corporation, or NAC, Viscounts 807 and 804, typically seated 60 passengers. It was powered by four wing-mounted Rolls-Royce Dart turboprop engines. The Rolls-Royce RB53 Dart is a British single-shaft turboprop engine with a two-stage centrifugal compressor driven by a three-stage axial turbine powered by 7 straight-flow combustion chambers in a can-annular layout. It first ran in 1957 and the initial variants had 654 kilowatt output rating and continued in production until 1987, with approximately 7,000 units produced, by which time variants were producing 2,400 kilowatts. The units fitted to the New Zealand Viscounts were the Dart 510 RDA6, or the 6th generation, which was a substantial redesign of the compressor section of the engine, boosting output to 1,250 kilowatts through improved compressor efficiency by enlarging its second stage. The Dart also powered New Zealand's Fokker Friendship fleet, being fitted with the 514s, which were essentially the same generation engine as the 510, but configured slightly differently for the Fokker Friendship and with a slightly higher power output. The plane was also being ordered in the United States, which was unusual for the time considering the lead the United States held in large airplane production. But the airline industry there was hungry for turboprops, and the American manufacturers were not interested until Lockheed finally relented with their L188 Electra. Washington, D.C.-based scheduled trunk carrier Capital Airlines had spent $45 million on an order of 40 Viscounts, the largest commercial dollar value order of British airplanes since the Second World War. Montreal-based Trans-Canada Airlines had ordered 22, and by the time New Zealand had placed the orders, there was a total of 154 planes sold. The Vickers Viscount first appeared in New Zealand in October 1953 at the 1953 London to Christchurch Air Race, known as the Last Great Air Race. It was about 19,000 kilometres long from London Airport to Christchurch International Airport in New Zealand. The British European Airways Series 700 Viscount GAMAV was one of the 8 planes that lined up on the start line. The airplane made 4 stops, averaging only 18 minutes ground time en route, and had to be towed off the runway in Christchurch, having ran out of fuel. The BEA Viscount competed in the handicap section along with the KLM Douglas DC-6A, but beat the competitor in elapsed time by 9 hours, with a 40 to 49 hour advantage. As part of the festivities, the airline sponsored a beauty pageant on 19 October 1953. The winner was Patsy Lloyd, followed by first runner-up Patricia Boswell and Shirley Cutler. But most importantly for the managers at NAC, in the lead up to the race during August, BEA had announced that the Viscount had led to a surge in profits for the airline, having the lowest cost tonne per mile of any passenger aircraft in their fleet. First reports of interest by NAC for a DC-3 replacement on the main trunk routes came in November 1954, the year following the race. NAC had intended on starting to replace the DC-3 in about 1958 or 1959, and provided Vickers Armstrong Limited of England a notice of intent to purchase 3 of their airliners at a cost of about £300,000 each, including spares. While that would approach £1 million, the corporation was confident at the time it had the financial reserves and ability to sell the DC-3 fleet for about £25,000 each. Compared with the introduction of some other airline types in New Zealand of that era, the decision to buy Viscounts was quite straightforward. Chairman Sir Leonard Isett said in January 1955 that, at present, the only plane in service that could be considered a suitable replacement is the Vickers Viscount. But the corporation is not rushing in, and as it is a long way off until new aircraft will be needed, due deliberation will take place before ordering. He also said that the introduction date of the new type would largely depend on the readiness of the new Rongotai Airport in Wellington for the scheduled trunk services. After visits to Australia to observe the Viscount in operation with Trans-Australian Airlines, NAC made a recommendation to the government owner in 1955 that the Viscount be selected to replace the DC-3, with the cost increasing to £2 million, which is about 135 million New Zealand dollars in 2026 purchasing power terms. However, it will be more than a year before the necessary enabling legislation was passed in Parliament, with an amending bill being presented in August 1956 to enable NAC to raise the loan, removing a statutory limit on the corporation's borrowing power. It was found that financing was needed, and under the existing Act, no more than £500,000 could be borrowed from the State Advances Corporation. The new value sought was £1.5 million, with the remaining £500,000 being sourced from NAC reserves. The orders were duly made and production got underway at the Vickers Armstrong Weybridge factory. The first plane was expected to arrive in November, in time for the 1957 Christmas peak, but labour troubles at the factory caused delays in assembly, and the plane did not arrive until January 1958, commencing services between Auckland and Christchurch on February 3 that year. The next two in the order came in February and March 1958, a fourth in May 1961, and a fifth, a second-hand unit, arrived in 1966. In 1968, the Viscount fleet livery was updated to match the new NAC Boeing 737 livery. ZK BRD was the first of three Vickers Viscount 807s that were ordered new by NAC in 1956. It was built at the Vickers Armstrong Weybridge factory and first flown there in December 1957. It arrived at Auckland Whenuapai on completion of the delivery flight on Friday, 10 January 1958. It operated the airline's first Viscount turboprop revenue service, Auckland to Christchurch return, on Monday, 3 February 1958. Christchurch and Auckland were, at that point, the only two civilian or joint-use airports that could accommodate the Viscount. Towards the end of its first year of service, the aircraft was extensively damaged while landing at Auckland Whenuapai on 12 November 1958, when the undercarriage was inadvertently retracted after touchdown. The plane was repaired and test flown the following month on 17 December 1958. In its last year of service, BRD was diverted to Napier Airport from Palmerston North, making it the only Viscount to land at Napier. The aircraft was withdrawn from service later that year at Christchurch on December 20, 1973, and was sold to BEA as GBBVH to be leased to business partner Gibraltar Airways Limited. BRD departed Christchurch on the ferry flight to the United Kingdom on Wednesday, 9 January 1974, and following servicing and repainting at East Midlands Airport, was finally delivered to Gibraltar Airways in April and commenced operations on behalf of BEA between London and Gibraltar. Gibraltar Airways was rebranded GB Airways in May 1981, and the aircraft was repainted with their new blue and red GB logo. An extensive overhaul and repaint was commenced in August 1987 at Southend that included installing a new wing spar, and the work continued until April the following year. However, BRD was destroyed in a landing accident at Bulk of Tangier, Morocco on 23 November 1988. The plane was landing in heavy rain with a gusting wind and a 21-knot crosswind component, and departed the left side of the runway before coming to rest in a culvert, 1,065 metres from touchdown. No injuries were sustained by the 74 passengers and 4 crew members, but the plane was deemed to be uneconomical to repair, was broken down for usable parts, and was cancelled from the British Aircraft Register in February 1989, aged 32 years. ZK BRE was the second of 3 Vickers Viscount 807s that were ordered new by NAC in 1956. It was built at the Vickers Armstrong Weybridge factory and first flown there in January 1959. It arrived at Christchurch on the completion of the delivery flight on Tuesday, 10 February 1959, and entered service on NAC's main trunk route services. BRE was withdrawn from service at Christchurch in July 1974 and sold to Montgomery Corporation of Bermuda, departing New Zealand on the delivery flight to Montgomery's European base in Germany in December 1974, moving again to Basel, Switzerland in January for storage before being overhauled there. In June 1975, BRE was leased to Air Caribbean as VP-LKA, with preparation work being done in East Midlands by Field Aircraft Services. Following completion of the work, the plane departed for Antigua via Iceland. It was intended to operate this aircraft for a group of several German-owned hotels and clubs from St. Kitts to neighbouring Caribbean islands, but this did not eventuate, and the aircraft remained stored in Antigua. In February 1976, it was ferried to the Atlas Air Facility at Fort Lauderdale for further storage, and the aircraft was re-registered VP-LAU. BRE spent 2 years in storage there before being moved to Crawley, West Sussex, England for Southern International Air Transport Limited, not to be confused with the CIA-linked Southern Air Transport of Miami, Florida, and was re-registered GCZSA. The plane left Bermuda in February 1978 for a complete overhaul, with the work taking a year to complete before entering service in March 1979 with Dan Air, operating their weekend flights from their London Gatwick base until being withdrawn from service and stored at Eastleigh the following January 1980. BRE was then sold to Royal American Airways in May 1980 and was repainted into the Royal American livery, with the registration marks N140RA applied, but the sale fell through and it remained stored at Eastleigh. The plane was then ferried to London Stansted in May 1981 and was completely broken up for spare parts and scrapped there by the end of 1982, aged 23 years. ZK BRF was the third of three Vickers Viscount 807s that were ordered new by NAC in 1956. It was built at the Vickers Armstrong Weybridge factory and first flown there in February 1959. It arrived in Christchurch on completion of the delivery flight on Monday, 23 March 1959. The plane flew main trunk routes for NAC, but was grounded following discovery of a crack in the wing attachment point in July 1970. Replacement parts were flown out from England and fitted to the aircraft, being returned to service the following month. BRF was finally withdrawn from service and stored in Christchurch in July 1974 while preparation began for its going on display in Christchurch at the Ferrymead Aeronautical Society, April 1975. The September 22 earthquake moved BRF on its steel mounting pads, but the February 22 earthquake caused more damage, with the right-hand wing tip coming into contact with the building's wall. Regardless, BRF remains with the Ferrymead Museum in Christchurch, aged 67 years. ZK BWO was a Vickers Viscount 807 ordered new by NAC in 1959. It was built at the Vickers Armstrong Weybridge factory and first flown in May 1961. It arrived in Christchurch on the completion of its delivery flight on Monday, 29 May 1961, and entered service on NAC's main trunk routes. While the additional capacity was required, spending for the airplane was part of a package that included the Fokker friendships and was included to boost the British content of the order, still a major political concern of that era. BWO was badly damaged when it overran the runway, landing in Wellington on Sunday, 17 February 1963. The plane slid off the end of the runway and down an embankment at the southern end of the airport near Moa Point. Minor damage was sustained to the propellers on the right-hand side. Temporary repairs were made on site and the aircraft flown to Christchurch on 3 engines, where it was repaired and returned to service. BWO operated the airline's final Viscount service, Palmerston North to Christchurch, on Sunday, 28 September 1975, and the aircraft was withdrawn from service and stored at Christchurch. It was sold to Australian Aircraft Sales of Sydney and ferried to Singapore via Sydney in December 1975. However, proposed sales to Pearl Air in the West Indies, then Southern Air Transport in the UK, and finally Air Caribbean, did not eventuate, and the airplane was scrapped at Singapore sometime after November 1980, age 20 years. ZK NAI was a Vickers Viscount 804 that was ordered new by Airworks subsidiary and charter flight operator Transair Limited of London Gatwick Airport. It was built at the Vickers Armstrong Weybridge factory and first flown there in August 1957, entering service with Transair as GAOXU. Ownership was transferred to British United Airways when the airlines merged on 1st July 1960. The aircraft was withdrawn from service and stored at London Gatwick in July 1962 and sold to Lot Poland as SP LVC by London-based aircraft broking firm Hunting Clan Air Services in November that year. It flew for Lot until being withdrawn from service and prepared for sale in 1966. It was test flown at London Heathrow on 20 January 1967 and sold to NAC a few days later, arriving in Christchurch on the completion of its delivery flight from the UK on Monday, 6 February 1967. NAI was withdrawn from NAC service at Christchurch in June 1975, where it was prepared for sale to Pearl Air as VQGAB and sent to the Netherlands for maintenance and service, departing Christchurch on Saturday, 5 July 1975. Following service with Pearl, NAI was then sold to Southern Air Transport Limited, England, in May 1978, entering the British Aircraft Register as GCSZB, entering service with Southern, and leased to Dan Air of London from January 1979. NAI was damaged when it ran off the runway at London Gatwick due to heavy snow in January 1980 and performed a 3-engine ferry flight to Eastleigh, Hampshire for repairs. The aircraft was withdrawn from service by then and stored at London Stansted in January 1981, but as with BWO, a proposed sale to Royal American Airways did not proceed and the airplane was ferried to Eastleigh for storage in August 1982. NAI was in and out of service with Philstone International Limited of Channel Islands as GCZZB from November 1982, then British Air Ferries, later British World Airlines from November 1983, then with Business Air Centre Limited of London from July 1984, before being sold to Euro Air in England in December for lease once again to British Air Ferries from May 1985. In August 1996, NAI was converted to cargo plane configuration, operated briefly by Parcel Force, but was withdrawn from service and ferried to Southend for storage and scrapping that October. The aircraft was reduced to scrap there except for the nose section that was retained for preservation in October 1998, and some parts were obtained by the Moorabbin Air Museum to assist in the restoration of their Viscount VHTVR. The nose section moved to the Fox Inn Hotel in Leicestershire, but was later offered for sale for £500 and was sold to Colin Jacobs, who loaned it to the Aeropark Collection at East Midlands Airport from January 2003, where it remains aged 69 years.